the first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the sunlight or the smell of coffee. It was silence, the kind that presses on your chest. From my kitchen window, I saw the garage door standing wide open. My heart sank. For 20 years, that door had stayed closed every night. Edward used to joke that our Shelby T500 slept better than we did. But Edward had been gone for 8 months now. I set my cup down and walked outside. The air was cool and soft, the kind of morning he would have loved, gentle spring light, a hint of dew on the grass. My slippers brushed against the concrete as I stepped into the garage. Empty. The oil stain in the middle of the floor, where that car had rested for decades, was still there, dark and familiar. But the car itself was gone. So was the hum of Edward's old radio, the scent of leather and motor oil that used to greet me. It felt like the last piece of him had vanished overnight. I was still standing there when a black SUV pulled into the driveway. My son Caleb stepped out, his wife, Tessa, close behind. Even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong, the way Caleb avoided my eyes. The way Tessa stood a little too tall, sunglasses hiding her expression. "Mom," he started, "I need to tell you something." "Where's the car, Caleb?" He hesitated, then looked at the ground. "I sold it." The words hit me like a cold slap. "You did what?" "I sold it yesterday. We needed the money. Tessa's trip to Paris, it's important for her work. I couldn't let her down." I stared at him, unable to speak. "That was your father's car. He spent half his life building it." Tessa finally stepped forward. "Edward's gone, Joanna. It's just a car." "Just a car." I looked back at the empty space, the tools on the wall still outlined in black marker, the journal still open on the workbench where Edward had left it. I felt the sting of betrayal and grief twist together. I didn't cry, not yet. I just whispered, "You had no right," and walked back toward the house. The phone rang early the next morning, cutting through the stillness of my kitchen. I almost didn't answer, it was too soon to face anyone, but something in me said to pick up. "Mrs. Foster," a man's voice asked. "This is Tom Garner from Garner Classics. I believe I have your husband's car." For a moment I couldn't breathe. "Edward Shelby." "Yes, ma'am. Your son brought it in yesterday to sell. I think you should come by. There's something you need to see, something your husband wanted you to know." My heart started pounding. I grabbed my coat and keys and drove across town, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Garner Classics sat at the end of an industrial street, clean glass windows, rows of restored cars gleaming in the sunlight. A man in his 60s waited by the door, tall, gray-haired, his expression solemn. "You must be Tom," I said. He nodded. "And you must be Joanna. Edward talked about you all the time." I frowned. "You knew my husband?" Tom gave a small smile. "He saved me once. 25 years ago, I was about to lose everything, my garage, my house. No bank would help. Edward co-signed my loan when no one else would. I paid him back, but I never forgot." He led me through the shop until we stopped in front of a burgundy Shelby T500, shining under the lights. My breath caught. It was spotless, like Edward had just finished polishing it yesterday. Tom turned to me. 2 years ago, Edward came by and asked me to install a small hidden compartment behind the radio. Said it was just for you, in case something happened to him." He pressed the edge of the panel, and it clicked open. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name on it, a manila folder, and a small brass key. Tom stepped back quietly. "He told me you'd know what to do when the time came." And just like that, I knew my husband had been trying to protect me, even from beyond the grave. I sat in my car outside the garage, the envelope trembling in my hands. Edward's handwriting was neat, steady, the same way he used to label every drawer in his workbench. For a moment I couldn't bring myself to open it. Then I did. "Joanna," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for keeping this from you, but I had to be sure before I told you. I've been investigating Tessa for over a year. She isn't who she says she is." I stopped reading, staring at the words until they blurred. "Investigating Tessa? My daughter-in-law?" The letter continued. "Her real name is Linda Marsh. She's done this before, twice that I've confirmed. She targets men with aging parents and family assets. She manipulates them, convinces them to sell property or drain accounts, then disappears. I don't have all the proof yet, but I'm close. If I can't finish it, I trust you will." My hands were shaking as I unfolded the second item, the manila folder. Inside were photos, photocopied documents, and notes written in Edward's tight script. 2 marriage certificates stood out first. Linda Marsh, a.k. Tessa Weston, married Mark Weston, Phoenix 2018. Linda Marsh, a.k. Tessa Powell, married George Powell, Tampa 2020. Next were newspaper clippings: local business owner defrauded by spouse, family loses life savings after home sale. Every story matched the same pattern: a new identity, a whirlwind romance, a sudden disappearance. I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth. Edward had been dying, and still he spent his final months protecting us. At the bottom of the folder was one more note in his handwriting. Tom knows everything. The key opens our safe deposit box at First National. There's something inside that will secure your future. Protect Caleb. He won't believe you until he sees it for himself. I love you. Always, Edward. I closed my eyes, whispering his name. For months I'd felt him gone from every corner of this house, but in that moment I could feel him again, as if he were sitting beside me, calm and steady as ever, reminding me to breathe, to think, to act. I wiped my tears and started the car. Edward had left me a path. Now it was up to me to follow it. The next morning, I brewed coffee but couldn't taste it. My mind kept circling the same thought: Edward had uncovered something terrible, and now it was my turn to finish what he started. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open, staring at the names, Mark Weston and George Powell, 2 men who had once loved the same woman my son now called his wife. I hesitated for a long time before dialing the first number. "Mr. Weston," I said when a man finally answered. "My name is Joanna Foster. I believe you once knew someone named Linda Marsh or Tessa." A long pause. Then a sigh. I was wondering when someone else would call. Mark told me his story. He'd met her at a charity event in Phoenix. She'd been charming, attentive, the kind of woman who made you feel seen. After they married, she began talking about his mother, how she seemed forgetful, how dangerous it was for her to live alone. Little by little, Tessa had convinced him his mother needed full-time care. "She found this fancy facility," he said quietly, "told me it was the best in the state. Only way to afford it was to sell my mom's house. I did. She moved my mother in, and 2 weeks later, she vanished. Took every penny. My mom died a year later, still asking when she could go home." I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight. After we hung up, I dialed the second number. George Powell answered on the first ring. His story was almost identical, different details, same ending. He sold his late father's repair shop at her urging. The money disappeared along with her. "She's smart," George said bitterly. "Studies you, finds your weakness, then turns it against you. Whatever she's doing to your family, stop her before it's too late." When I hung up, the kitchen felt colder than before. I looked around at the house Edward and I had built from nothing, every corner filled with years of work and love. She'd done this before, and now she was coming for us. I reached for Edward's letter again, tracing the ink with my fingertip. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I'll protect him, just like you wanted." That afternoon, I called the number written at the bottom of Edward's last note, Peter Collins. His voice was steady and low, the kind that made you trust him instantly. "I worked with Edward before he passed," Peter said when we met at a small diner near the hospital. "He asked me to keep an eye on Tessa just in case." We sat in a corner booth while the waitress refilled our coffee. Peter opened a worn notebook filled with details, dates, places, patterns. "She follows the same routine," he explained. "First, she builds debt, luxury trips, clothes, dinners, all to make her husband feel responsible. Then she plants small doubts about the parent, mentions forgetfulness, fatigue, confusion. Eventually she convinces the son that selling the house or transferring assets is the best way to help. By the time they realize what happened, she's long gone." I felt a chill run through me. "And Caleb?" "She's setting the stage," Peter said. "The Paris trip is step 1. After that she'll start talking about your health. Don't confront her yet, let her believe you're unaware, we need proof." When I got home, I began a journal. I wrote down everything Tessa said, every visit, every glance that felt rehearsed. 2 weeks later they came for dinner. I made roast chicken and mashed potatoes, Caleb's favorite. We sat together at the same table Edward had built. For the first half hour the conversation was polite, almost warm. Then, casually, Tessa said, "Joanna, did you remember to turn the stove off earlier? I thought I smelled something burning." Her tone was light, but her eyes watched me carefully. "I turned it off," I replied evenly. "You must have imagined it." She smiled. Maybe. I just worry sometimes. Big house, one person, it can be a lot to manage. Caleb nodded without looking up. I forced a smile, but my hand tightened around my fork. When they left, I opened my notebook and wrote the date and time beside her comment. The performance had begun, and this time I would be the one taking notes. A week later, I decided it was time. The lies were growing thicker each day, like vines creeping through every corner of my home. If I waited longer, they'd strangle what little trust Caleb and I still had left. I called him one morning. "Caleb, can you come by after work? I found something your father left for you." He hesitated. "Tessa and I usually have dinner around 6. "This is important, son, please, just you." Silence. Then, a quiet sigh. "All right, I'll be there." That afternoon, I set everything out on the kitchen table: Edward's letter, the photographs, the marriage certificates, the folder of notes. When Caleb walked in, he froze. "Mom, what is all this?" I motioned for him to sit. "It's your father's work. He spent his last year uncovering the truth about Tessa." His face tightened. "Not this again." "Just read." Reluctantly, he picked up the letter. As his eyes moved down the page, his jaw clenched. When he reached the part about the other marriages, he shook his head. No, Dad was paranoid. He didn't trust her because she's younger, successful. He always judged people like that. "Your father was meticulous," I said softly. "He checked every detail. These are official records, Caleb. Call the men yourself." He stood, shoving the chair back. "I'm not doing this. You can't keep trying to destroy my marriage because you don't like her." I stayed calm. "This isn't about liking her. It's about protecting you." He turned toward the door. "You've lost it, Mom. You need help." The words stung, but I let him go. If Edward were here, he'd remind me that the truth always finds its own way through. Hours passed. The house felt too quiet. I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. Then, close to midnight, the phone rang. "Mom." Caleb's voice was broken. "I called them. Both of them." I closed my eyes. "And?" "It's true," he whispered. "Every word. She did it to them. Exactly like Dad said. I asked her about her past, about where she grew up. She changed her story 3 times. Then she screamed at me, packed a bag and left." "Where is she now?" "I don't know. She won't answer her phone. I think she's running." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said quietly, "Come home, Caleb. We'll face this together." When I hung up, I looked toward the garage. The faint scent of motor oil still lingered there, as if Edward were standing beside me, whispering it's not over yet. The next morning, Peter called before sunrise. His tone was sharp, urgent. "We've found her. She's booked a one-way flight to Mexico City. Leaves at 6. I felt my pulse quicken. "Can we stop her?" "Yes, but we'll need Caleb's cooperation. The police can only act if he confirms the fraud." Within the hour, Caleb arrived, eyes red from a sleepless night. He looked 10 years older. "Tell me what I have to do." Peter explained everything as we sat around my kitchen table, the same place where the lies had started to unravel. "You'll give a statement about the credit cards, the forged accounts. Once that's done, the police will issue a warrant under her real name, Linda Marsh." Caleb nodded. "Let's finish this." We drove together to the airport. The early morning sky was still gray, and the city lights flickered like tired stars. Inside, the terminal buzzed with quiet energy: the clatter of luggage wheels, soft announcements over the speakers, the faint smell of coffee. Peter guided us to a spot near security, behind a column with a clear view of the line. 2 detectives in plainclothes stood ready on the other side. At 5:40 she appeared, Tessa, or Linda, wheeling 2 expensive suitcases, dressed in a cream coat and oversized sunglasses. Calm, confident, the same poise she'd always used to disguise her deceit. Caleb stiffened beside me, his hands were trembling. "That's her." The detectives moved in. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." She turned, and for one second her expression slipped a flash of panic, quickly masked by a smile. "Is there a problem, officers?" "We have a warrant for your arrest, Linda Marsh." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "You must be mistaken. My name is Tessa Foster." "Please step aside." Then she ran, dropped her suitcase, kicked off her heels, and bolted down the terminal. It was over in seconds. Security tackled her near the departure board as people gasped and pulled out their phones. The detectives opened her luggage. Inside, stacks of cash, a fake passport, and documents under multiple aliases. When she saw us, she went still. Her voice cracked with fury. You did this." Caleb didn't answer. He just looked at her, eyes hollow. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "No, Tessa, Edward did. We just finished what he started." And for the first time, she had nothing left to say. 2 months later, the courtroom smelled of old wood and dust. Tessa, or rather, Linda Marsh, sat in handcuffs as the judge read her sentence. 12 years in federal prison for fraud, identity theft, and financial deception. She didn't look at us once. When it was over, Caleb let out a slow, shaking breath, like he'd been holding it since the day she left. Life after the trial felt quieter, softer, like the storm had finally passed but left its marks. Caleb moved back into the house, taking his old room upstairs. The posters from his teenage years were still there, faded reminders of simpler times. He started therapy twice a week. Some days he was talkative, other days silent. I didn't push. Healing takes the time it needs. One morning, a deep rumble echoed from outside. I looked through the kitchen window and froze. The Shelby sat in the driveway, its burgundy paint gleaming in the sun. Tom Garner stepped out, smiling. "Thought you might want her back where she belongs," he said. Caleb came running down the stairs when he heard the sound. He stopped at the door, eyes wide. "Mom, is that?" "Your father's car," I said softly. Tom handed me the keys. "Edward built this for you both. It was never meant to leave your family. I just kept it safe." Caleb stared at the car, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve it. I sold it for a trip that almost destroyed everything." Tom shook his head. "You were a victim too, son. Edward knew that. That's why he prepared all this, to protect you as much as her." When Tom left, we stood together in the garage. The air smelled the same as it always had: motor oil, leather, faint traces of Edward's favorite soap. Caleb ran his hand along the hood, reverent. "Dad would have been proud of you," he said quietly. "Of us," I corrected. Later that week, we began restoring the car together. We followed Edward's old notes, page by page, checking the oil, polishing the chrome, replacing the worn leather trim. It wasn't about the car anymore. It was about connection, about carrying forward the love Edward had built into every bolt and screw. Every sound of the wrench, every hum of the engine, felt like Edward was still with us, steady, patient, proud. Spring melted quietly into summer, and life began to feel whole again. The Shelby gleamed in the garage, back in its rightful place. Some mornings Caleb and I would sit there with coffee mugs in hand, not saying much, just listening to the soft tick of the cooling engine after a drive. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel haunted by loss. It felt protected, fulfilled, like Edward's promise still lived in the walls and the air around us. I often thought about everything we'd been through: the betrayal, the lies, the fear, and how easily love can blind us when we want to believe the best in someone. But I also thought about what Edward had done. The quiet planning, the foresight, the love so deep it prepared for a danger he might never see. One evening I stood in the garage alone. The sunset spilled gold across the hood of the car. I placed my hand on the wheel, feeling the smooth curve beneath my palm. "You did it, Edward," I whispered. "You protected us." And somehow I could almost hear his voice in reply, calm, proud, certain. Love doesn't end when someone is gone. It keeps working quietly, finding its way back home. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll share it. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Because love, like healing, travels farther than we ever imagine, and sometimes it drives home in a Shelby that never stopped waiting.